what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. I'm Ben. Over the last couple weeks, I've been running all of my motorcycles down my sort of dual sport test circuit. We compared the DR650 to the XR650 here first, and then most recently we compared both of those to the 701 Enduro. That seemed to stir up a bit of interest, which got me thinking. As much as we all love the simplicity of our big singles, there are, well, some new motorcycles on the scene, and if you guys have not been following the channel for more than a year or two, you probably don't recognize this bike, but the rest of you will recognize this as my Tenere 700 that I built, tested, and then sold to my dad, so that's why I've still got access to it. So I thought today, why not run down that same circuit? We'll hit some pavement, we'll hit some gravel, we'll hit some highway, and then maybe we'll get off the road and do a little bit of riding here in my woods to see how this bike compares to the bikes that I own now. So let's fire these twin cylinders up and take this thing for a rip. So one of the very first things that I noticed getting back on this bike, or even I guess before I got back on the bike, is that it does not have the same quality that the DR650 nor the 701 has, where it feels light on its feet. Definitely takes a bit more effort to get it up off of the side stand, meaning it's a bit more top heavy. It's also a lot more heavy in general just to push around a bit. Of course, exaggerating a little bit. I've done some insane things with this motorcycle. It's definitely highly capable, but it does feel very different to just move around in the garage, and of course that will translate if you're trying to move it around off the road in some mud or sand or whatever. It's definitely a big bike. Most of the other ones that we've been looking at are somewhere around 350, 370 pounds. This one, completely stock, weighs 460, and that's without the crash protection, the heavy-duty bash plate, any of the things up on the dash here. I mean, it definitely all adds up, and it can make for a bit of a heavy bike. With my 5'10 stature, 31-inch inseam, and only weighing 155 pounds, when I own this bike, I put this lower seat concept seat on here, which takes about an inch off. However, because the seat and the bike are so wide, your legs kind of have to go out before they go down. So even though this seat is technically closer to the ground than the rest, on a bit of a hill or a ditch like this, it still makes me, well, a little bit nervous. There's a lot of weight to keep track of here. So unlike the big bore dual sport dinosaurs, and similar to the 701, this is fuel injected, of course. Also, of course, instead of one cylinder, today we've got two. This is a parallel twin, very similar motor to what you find in all of the adventure bikes today, like the Transalp, the Touareg, V-Strom, and I mean, the list goes on. Everybody is using this engine today, and with good reason. This bike always sounded nice, but it sounds especially good with the Camel ADV high exhaust mount kit on it. The bike also does have a ECU reflash by Two Wheeled Dyno Works, and even before then, this thing had, well, more than enough power. Now, obviously, because this is just a very different engine in this bike, it's going to feel different pretty much altogether across the RPM range, but it does feel a bit more like, I think, a dirt bike than you would assume an engine straight out of Yamaha's sport bikes would, and it definitely is tuned a bit more for this type of riding. But it really does, honestly, I think, a pretty good job, and it honestly feels like a lot of fun both out on the road and even off the road, whether you're just a little ways off the road or a long ways off the road, like on single track. The horsepower numbers on this bike are fairly similar to that of the 701. Power to weight ratio is obviously a bit different, since this bike is, well, you know, a little bit heavier. However, back when I first purchased this bike, I was coming off of a Gen 2 KLR 650, so in comparison to the 40 horsepower that bike had with relatively the same weight, I believe they're within a couple pounds of each other, completely stock, this bike definitely felt way more happy out on the road. It felt way more fun on the road. It felt, well, a lot more like my sport bikes did. And that's really why I went all in and decided to pick one of these up and test it. And man, it was the most exciting experience I think that I have ever had on a motorcycle. It was just exactly what I was looking for. I was so pleased with the power and the feeling. I mean, this bike just feels so good on the road. And I mean, I've said that about the 701 and the DR, and I mean even the XR, but those feel good for what they are. An older dual sport, or even a newer dual sport, but a dual sport just the same, where this bike, I mean, this is not a single cylinder thumper that was, designed for the dirt and has a headlight slapped on it. I mean, this thing was made to travel. And yet, as much as it was made to travel, it really feels like a great off-road bike. I mean, it's just, to me, the perfect, or a perfect crossover between a road bike and a dirt bike. And to me, this is exactly what a midweight adventure bike should be. And it really does, I think, a great job at that. I mean, it's definitely a very smooth, aggressive, powerful feeling bike that it does take, a bit to kind of get leaned over. I mean, I definitely find myself kind of pushing on the bars a bit more to get this thing on its side. But once it's there, man, it feels solid. It feels good. It really holds a corner nice. I love riding this bike on the road. This is an awesome machine out here, and just something that I think a lot of people could really appreciate. And even though I've complained about it a bit, a lot of that comes from the fact that this bike is just heavier. The more weight you've got, the more stuck you are to the road. But as much as this should feel like a sport bike, and you would think would be so much smoother than archaic bikes like the DR650 and the XR650, even the single-cylinder thumper that the 701 has, you would think that it would feel a lot more like a sport bike, I guess. And to me, I mean, it definitely does not. And if you've ever ridden something with an inline 4, I mean, you realize pretty quickly that these are not the same type of machine. This thing definitely feels sort of rumbly, and honestly, I mean, it does have a bit of vibration in the bars, sort of depending where you are on the RPM gauge. Somewhere right around the 5,500 mark is where I think the bike just kind of in general picks up the most vibrations. The bars definitely have a little bit of buzz to them then. The foot pegs certainly do. And it's something that I think you forget about pretty easily. And honestly, I mean, even as long as I've been on the bike now, I really haven't even been thinking about it. But it is always something that once I do think about, or once I'm off of this bike for a long time to jump back on it, really does kind of catch me off guard, because I have it in my head that it's, this whisper quiet, smooth bike, and it's really not. It does have a bit of, I don't know, a feeling you get from it, I guess. And it's not really a bad one, but it is something that I think you should keep in mind when you're looking at something like an XR, a DR. I mean, sure, they vibrate more, but if you're on a motorcycle with knobbies, there's going to be some vibrations. I mean, it's just going to happen. No bike is going to be completely smooth unless you're buying something that is actually intended strictly for the road and has road tires on it. This bike is definitely not that way, though. This thing does incredibly well on gravel. It really feels, honestly, pretty solid. Not quite as solid as the DR650, and I think some of that, just has to do with the perfect setup that the DR has, with the wheelbase, the rake, and just the weight distribution. This bike has a lot going for it in that way, but still just isn't quite like the DR. I do have to say, though, I think it feels probably better than the 701 out here, and honestly, I don't know why that is. I mean, I guess probably, again, just the wheelbase, the rake, which is the angle that the forks are at relative to a vertical line drawn in the air. That can definitely change how a bike handles on the road and off the road. But really, I mean, with all of the factors that it has going for it, as heavy as it is, I mean, it seems like they did a pretty darn good job. And one of my favorite things about this bike was always the feeling that it gave you when you would punch the throttle and go around a corner, and that is because of the anti-squat rear. And essentially, the way that they've got this swing arm and the driven sprockets set up, when you hit the gas, rather than the back half of the bike dropping and sort of, I don't know, throwing things off, losing your forward momentum, this bike actually jacks its rear end up and shoves the tire down into whatever you're riding on, which is partially why it's so easy to wheelie, but also makes for a very fun ride on the gravel. It gives you tons of traction and tons of confidence to do things that you you probably shouldn't be doing with a 460-pound bike, but it is just absolutely amazing how different that feels from hitting the throttle than anything else. And the 701 is close, but just because you have that drop in the rear on that bike, I mean, there is just nothing that can compare to this, and it's honestly probably my favorite thing about this bike. I mean, it is just so different feeling from anything else, and really confidence inspiring. More so than it probably should be. The suspension is definitely set up very well, partially from Yamaha, but also because I have everything dialed in on here. You can pretty much make almost any adjustment that I think you'd need to. Compression, rebound damping, there is no preload adjustment on the front, but of course you can adjust the preload on the rear. And honestly, I mean, I never really had too much of an issue with it once I had it dialed in. The front bottoms, if you slap it really hard, but I've had this thing way up in the air, both tires, and I mean, it handles jumps and single track and potholes and everything, I mean, exceptionally well. This is a very nice riding motorcycle, and really the suspension, the way that I've got it dialed in for off-road, honestly works pretty good on-road. Maybe not the smoothest ride. I wouldn't expect cruiser comfort, but it definitely feels like a really fun kind of sporty bike on the road, even with those settings. And speaking of sporty, let's see how this thing compares. I'm extra interested to see how this thing compares to the 701. So let's get 0 to 60 here. Ready, go. Ready, go. Definitely a very quick bike, and oh man, just a lot of fun. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are going, you're comparing apples to oranges to bananas and cucumbers and kumquats. But the thing is, to me, all bikes that are capable of both on and off-road travel are similar enough that I think they're worth comparing. And if they're not, I mean, I guess I'm not really sure why you're watching this video, but I will definitely agree with the fact that this bike does just feel so much different. I mean, as much as I enjoy riding the XR, the DR, and the 701, and believe me, I do. I mean, there's a reason that I moved on for this bike. It is partially YouTube, but it is partially because I wanted to move to something like that, just to see what it was like, to try to ride it like an adventure bike. And I've got to say, as much as the off-road ability of those bikes totally blows this one away, there is just something about this bike that just, I mean, I guess a couple somethings that it just feels very set apart from those two. And if you've ever ridden any of those, really any thumper, and then gotten on something with a parallel twin like this, even if it's an illusion, it gives you the illusion of the feeling that this is a bike that is meant to be doing what we're doing now, where the thumpers, as much fun as they are and as they can be, I mean, it doesn't give you the feeling that you're on a powerful road bike, where this thing, I mean, there's very little about it that makes me think dual sport when I'm on the pavement, where any of those other bikes, I mean, you know you're on a dual sport the whole time. You might be having a blast and be smiling or laughing your head off like I have been, but none of them are adventure bikes in the sense that this is an adventure bike. And my whole plan this summer is to build the XR and the DR 650 into adventure bikes that are much better than this, for me anyways, and for my riding style, which is a little bit less pavement, a little bit more off-road, but still wanting to be able to carry a whole bunch of gear out into the woods, camp, and then be able to ride single track. And to be honest, I think if I would have continued to try to ride this thing like I had been on single track, I think, well, it maybe not have turned out so well for me, and maybe it only would have been a broken leg or whatever, but in my mind, it just wasn't worth it. I wanted to move to something that my skills could keep up with, and that if I made a mistake, it wasn't going to be the end of a riding season. And in that sense, and for that reason, I definitely don't regret selling this bike or moving on to the bikes that I've got now. I think, honestly, I am moving in the right direction. I think it seems like a lot of you guys think that too. Needless to say, that does not detract anything from an amazing bike like the T7. I loved this bike the entire time that I rode it. I loved it when I sold it, and I still love it today. It's a great bike. It's a great option if you're somebody that is going to limit the amount of stupid stuff you're going to do off-road, and I didn't have it in me to do that, so that's why I decided it was time to move on. But this thing, I think, is a great option. Of course, keeping in mind that it is a lot of bike, and if you're somebody that's bigger, taller than me, it might not be a problem for you at all. If you're used to riding, a big BMW GS, then this will probably feel light and flickable and fun, and it might be a much better option. It all depends on your size and the type of riding that you want to do. I honestly do not believe that there are any bad motorcycles out there. There are just misinformed riders that purchase a bike assuming it's going to do what they want or need it to, and sometimes you find out that you made a mistake, and in that case, I think it is just best to do a bit more research and move on to something that will fit your riding style better. And if you guys watched the other videos, you may have noticed we passed the section there that I usually talk about issues with bikes like this. But this one, I don't know that there really are any. The ECU reflash that I had done by Two Wheel Dyno Works, where I actually pulled the bike's brain out and sent it off to the lab to be reconditioned. Basically, what I was after was that it drops the set point for the radiator fan to kick on, because of course this is liquid cooled. It sets it much lower than the factory setting, which was nice. It also sort of cleans up the choppy throttle and is supposed to add a bit of a power increase, along with the more open air intake that I put on this, which is under the seat, and of course that Camel ADV pipe. And that definitely did wake the bike up a little bit. I would say it's definitely more than powerful enough. Of course, there are more mods that you could do to it, but for my type of riding and for my dad's type of riding, I mean, this thing has more than enough power and has been nothing but reliable for the both of us. We did, I guess, have a fork seal blowout right around 6,000 miles. However, with all the off-roading that this bike has seen, I can't say that I was too surprised by it, I guess. And this bike does have upside-down forks without the boots on it, so that may have had something to do with that. I could fit right under that. I believe service intervals, at least for the valves anyways, are probably going to be the longest on this bike in comparison to anything else. The XR is kind of comically often. The DR, you have to do fairly often, and the 701, I think, is kind of the same. The XR is super easy to do. This one, kind of like the DR, you have to take the whole valve cover off to get in there to make your adjustments, and then you actually are replacing the shims in there rather than just turning and locking an adjuster in place like the XR. So it definitely requires a little bit of extra work. I think at 600 miles you also were supposed to have the valve bodies checked and then synced if they were out of sync. I took this in and had it done at the dealer, or had it looked at, I guess, and they said everything looked fine. They didn't need to do anything. So I would say definitely a bike that you should be able to get on and ride for a long time. Just keep an eye on those seals and make sure you clean up the shiny part of the rods so you don't have anything stuck on there wrecking the seals. I don't know that I remember the last time I had this bike on the highway. Certainly gets up to 70 no problem, and as you can hopefully see here, we do have a 6th gear, which is similar to the 701. However, I think the 701 almost feels less buzzy. The hand grips are actually a lot smoother than I remember. I get like no vibration through the bars almost. I guess if I really clamp down, but even then not really. But the pegs, I'm not gonna look at the pegs, you believe me, they're there. The pegs actually do have a bit of a vibration. Not bad enough that I think it would bother you or that you'd even think about it after a while. but they do hum along a bit. And I mean, that of course could be the engine, that could be the knobby tires on the pavement, or a mix of the two. Either way, not really a big deal. As far as handling of the bike goes, though, I mean, this is by far the smoothest and best handling bike at high speeds. I mean, there's just no way around that. That 460 pounds would definitely not feel good coming down on your leg off-road, and certainly is a lot to manage. But there is nothing like a heavy bike that is set up for road riding on the highway. I mean, there is just no comparison. And I've said that the XR, the DR, and the 701 all really impressed me when I took them on the highway for the first time. And they continue to impress me on the highway, because they do really do a very good job. But again, they do a good job for a single-cylinder thumper. They are not the same type of bike as this, and there's just no way around that. I mean, this thing is meant to do long hours on the highway, and it feels really good, really solid. The wind protection's there. I mean, you have all of this keeping that wind from hitting you and batting you around, and that maybe seems like a silly thing, but after a couple hours on the freeway, it makes a huge difference, and it definitely is worth it, which is why I will be trying to sort of replicate something like this on those bikes. This is a bike that you sit sort of in, and I guess it's kind of hard to capture, but it's very different in that sense. And I think that's why, I mean, even just having your weight lower in the bike, I think it's partially why this feels so much different from the rest of those bikes, because in my case, 155 pounds that I'm adding to this, plus my gear, is down basically inside of the bike, where the DR and the XR, I mean, that line almost goes up from the gas tank, where this, I mean, you're dipping so low. So that definitely helps handling, but it also just, I don't know, is a nice place to be. You just feel, I don't know, like you're in a lounge chair rather than on a bench seat, I guess. And this bike really just does feel good to sit on for a long period of time. The bars are nice and high up. They are really far forward from the seat. I mean, it's just a really good cruising posture. I mean, I like where my legs are. There's really not anything about the ergonomics of this bike that I dislike. I mean, other than maybe being able to get my feet to the ground a little bit easier if this was a little bit skinnier or lower. But I mean, even as is, this is just such a nice bike to sit on. As far as brakes go, we've got two giant rotors up front and a decent sized one in the back. I mean, the brakes on this are, whoa, more than sufficient to kick in the ABS. Oh, now we're in between a bunch of gears too. There we go. So a lot like the 701, if you're a big powerful bike with a lot of weight behind it, you need good brakes. The rear does seem to travel a bit more, I guess, than I would like. And it's something that is usable, but I definitely would recommend the Camel ADV upgrade lever. And I can put links for that stuff down in the description. I can actually put links for all of the stuff that I've got on this bike. And if you want to pick any of that stuff up, it would definitely help me to continue making more videos like this for you guys. So I definitely appreciate that. Now, off-road, as much as I've been giving this thing praise, what I mean by this thing is good off-road is, I mean this thing is good on off-road trails that are a little bit faster moving than this. If you try to go slow on this bike, it really is a bit of a beast, and it definitely gets heavy very, very quickly. And that, I think, is something that a lot of people just kind of forget with an adventure bike. Is they're meant to go on adventures, they're meant to go off-road, but they're not really meant to do things like a dirt bike would. And that's why I'm not going to continue any farther than this. We're just going to get spun around and take it back in, because I don't want to hurt myself, I don't want to hurt my dad's bike. And like I've been saying, as much as you can do this with a bike like this, it's not really something that I want to continue to do. I've got my dual sports for this type of stuff. This is an adventure bike. This is much better suited for fast-moving ATV tracks and that sort of thing. And I promise we will get out and do some comparison videos between this and the new bikes on trails that are, well, made for this type of machine. For now, let's just see if we can get this thing back by the other ones without dropping it. Yeah, Yeah, this thing was just a hair closer to the ground. I think I would feel so much better on it, but as light and as good as it feels when you're moving, the minute you slow down, and especially if you conk the motor out, it will bite you real quick. Didn't I say I was just trying to get back? Why am I over here now? I guess to test the suspension. And it does feel good, but it is, I mean, it's just a lot of weight to try to manage. So even as decent as Yamaha set the suspension up, I mean, it's still, it's just a heavy bike, and there's really not a whole lot of way around that. Ugh. Back when it was mine, I would have done this. I had done this when it was mine. Ugh. Oh, yeah. Well, that was certainly an interesting and eye-opening experience. Also, a little bit painful, if I'm being honest. And I guess after riding a desk for 12 years, I think maybe my wrists and everything inside of them is maybe not in the best shape, and that might have something to do with this. But I've got to say, I did not remember how uncomfortable this bike made me off-road, and I think that may have something to do with the fact that I've been riding these machines that just really do give me a lot more confidence. As tall as the XR is, it's just so much easier to maneuver. It's so much lighter. As good as the suspension is on this bike, like I said, there's just so much weight there that, I mean, any little wrong move where you're going too slow or you get jostled the wrong way, or yeah, you make a mistake with the clutch, this 460-pound bike that feels so light and so good can definitely turn into a very heavy monster that wants to wrestle you to the ground in just a matter of seconds. I mean, less than seconds, milliseconds. And that really has kind of reaffirmed my belief that if you're somebody like me that wants to run highway but also wants to do single track on the same bike, I really think that these big bore dual sports are something that you guys should be looking at. No, they're not nearly as good of an on-road bike as this. They don't feel nearly as good on the highway. They don't give you the same comfort that a bike like this can provide. But if you're somebody that is more interested in the off-road riding aspect of dual purpose or adventure riding, I think these are just the way to go. It's just a better package for somebody that's smaller like me. It's a better package for somebody that isn't really all that interested in doing 100-mile days on the freeway. I mean, if that's you, then obviously this is the best choice and something that you should be looking at, or something very, very similar, maybe even a Transalp that's a little bit more road-oriented. This is a great bike for on-road and off-road riding, but these are amazing bikes for their ability to get you down the highway at 70 miles an hour without feeling like the engine is too stressed, like the KLR or a DRZ 400, but yet they're so light and so capable, which of course makes things a little bit less comfy on the highway. But even still, for me anyways, and for the amount of added off-road comfort and safety that these things provide, it's totally worth it for me to have that little bit of lackluster ride both on the pavement and on the highway. Sure, they're not great, but they are still a lot of fun. Nowhere near this bike, but I just don't care. This is an amazing machine. I love it. If my dad wants to sell it, maybe someday I will buy it again. But to be honest, I don't ever see myself taking this bike down the same type of trails that I take these things down. These are just meant for it. They're much more comfortable, and there's something that I'm super excited to get built and to test. So if you guys want to make sure you see those videos, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care, stay safe, and stay swanky.